I stand before you tonight at the beginning of what has been a multi-year and especially a multi-month process of meetings, briefings, meeting with CPRA, groups of citizens, you as the council. And tonight before you is a vote where you will choose whether or not to send to the people of St. Charles the decision to fund for a sustainable future the wastewater department, and also to fund in a great way a true flood protection system for both the East and the West Bank. So I'll go through an abbreviated version of the presentation we did on Thursday night at the Legislative Committee meeting. First, we asked our wastewater department, besides the day-to-day operation expenses and electrical bills and payroll and fuel for the trucks, what infrastructure projects are going to be needed for the next 10 years looking into the future to maintain a fully operational system that can keep all of its licenses and permits, but also a system that has the capacity to handle future growth for St. Charles Parish as a growing, thriving suburb near New Orleans and Jefferson Parish. And here's the list of what our wastewater department in conjunction with the Public Works Department was able to put together. It totals well over $41 million in projects, but I want to keep I'd like everyone to keep in mind this is over many years. This is not going to happen all at once. These projects are the identified needs. Several of these haven't even been designed. Most of them will have to be fine-tuned, tweaked, and then designed before we can go out to bid on them. The first major category is infiltration and inflow, and that, as you know from our committee meeting, is going throughout the parish and repairing or replacing leaking and cracked pipes that are under the ground, and during a rain event get filled with rainwater, which then makes its way to our treatment systems and we have to spend chemicals, time, and wear and tear on the equipment and facilities to treat sometimes 3 times the normal daily capacity due to rain infiltration. The second major item, 2 projects related to our oxidation ponds. The first one is to dredge and upgrade the Luling oxidation pond, which has been around for many years. That's roughly a $5 million project, not only upgrading and expanding, but dredging it to its as-built depth. It hasn't been dredged since it was constructed and therefore has silted up over time. The second oxidation pond is part of increasing the capacity and resiliency of the system, and that is putting an oxidation pond somewhere near the Parish area so that we can take that capacity, that load off of the Hahnville regional plant and put it into the Parish oxidation pond. That's roughly $7 million. The lift stations you see listed there are on both sides of the river and throughout the parish. Some of them are new lift stations, some are upgraded, and some are repaired, and that's why you'll see a difference in cost, but they total nearly $4 million over the next several years. And the final line or category is a little over $2 million, and that relates to laying new lines throughout the parish, purchasing some equipment and vehicles, the vacuum truck that you all have talked about and had to budget and unbudget for several years, and also just generic vehicles for our wastewater department that currently doesn't have the funds right now to adequately replace the vehicles that run constantly 24/7. Wastewater, as you all know, is a 24/7 from parish line to parish line department. They don't get days off. They have to keep the system working. And then there's a small equipment purchase of a camera. So we asked our department and the finance department to look forward 5 years and tell us what the wastewater financial system looks like going ahead 5 years with or without action. And as you all know, the action plan presented by the administration for your consideration involves not only the vote tonight, but multiple votes moving into the future regarding ordinances, rate changes, base fee changes, and also just some structural differences in how wastewater is funded. But the right side of the column is if none of the plan is put into effect. So this is basically wastewater as it is today moving forward. You've got a negative $600,000 fund balance and a deficit of roughly $4.5 million after this year concludes, and that grows as you move forward to a cumulative deficit of $12 million in 2019 and an annual deficit of roughly $2 million. Now, the negative $600,000 in 2015 includes a $1 million general fund transfer. So what that should tell you as council members who have budgeted many times in the past, the subsidy from the general fund, if we do not allocate new additional revenues, will continue to grow into the future to the tune of $2 to $3 million a year. The left side of the column is the fund balance with action. As you can see in 2015, if it's all implemented, all elements of the plan proposed, annually we will be in the black, $700,000, give or take a bit. These are all projections, obviously. And by 2017, we've repaid that deficit, and we're now starting to build up a cash balance. At that point, we believe future administrations will be able to reduce the sewer rates charged to the residents on their monthly water bills. But as you can see, the difference is stark and it's great, and one side relies on the general fund for multi-millions per year. The other side diversifies the revenue sources for wastewater and puts it onto the path of fiscal sustainability. In front of you, the major component and foundation of the plan is the millage proposition that you'll be voting on in a few minutes after the presentation. The millage is a renewal of 2.2 mills for roughly the next, well, not roughly, for the next 30 years. My apologies. These mills are currently on the tax rolls. They would continue until this new proposition expired. By 2018, the old bonds that are currently being paid by this millage will be paid off, and then the department and the projects will have the funding necessary to be completed and move forward. The difference between this proposition and the old proposition is that this proposition is written in a way for limited tax bonds to be levied against it. Limited tax bonds mean you don't go sell them in all of one chunk. You sell them as needed over time, thus necessitating the 30-year millage length, because some of these bonds probably won't be sold until year 9 or 10, and they still need 20 years to be paid off. We anticipate being able to pay the existing bonds off early, so the anticipation is paying them off by 2017. There's an accumulated fund balance in the sinking fund, and so we hope to pay those off early. But again, the summary: a 30-year renewal of existing mills of 2.2 currently being used to pay wastewater bonds, and it would allow, the new language would allow the department to use the annual revenue for operations and maintenance and also for bonding for limited tax bonds. The total bonds that we believe, based on the advice given to us by our finance department and bond counsel, some of the scenarios equal about $47 million of available bond capacity for this proposition. That does not mean this vote tonight, nor the vote by the people, are passing those bonds. It is simply the ability for future councils and administrations, if needed, and you saw the $41 million of needed upgrades and projects earlier, if needed, that bond capacity exists. As they sell those bonds, the revenue or the cash taken in annually from that millage would, a portion would be set aside to pay off the bonds that are sold, and a portion would be able to be used by the department annually to operate the department and subsidize, and by 2017, lower rates. As I said before, this is not a new millage. This is a renewal of existing millages, and so therefore, the net effect to the taxpayer, there is no difference in their tax bill. Their tax bill next year will be the same as it is today as far as this bond is concerned. So we've gotten asked a few times, why now, why this election? And the short, simple answer is costs are increasing. Rate increases have not been done year over year as they should have been. The code does not allow for annual CPI increases, which would allow the sewer rates to gradually increase over time. Over the past 15 years, rate increases were not done in 7 of those 15. In 3 of the 15, a portion of the recommended rate increase was done. And on 3 separate occasions, previous councils voted to remove rate increases that were already in the code. And so those revenues over time weren't allowed to compound and grow and provide needed revenue for the system. Capital expenses currently cannot be done except in a reactionary manner as breaks occur and we must go repair a piece of equipment. By passing this and having that bond capacity, the department could finally have a 10 to 15 year capital improvement project plan, and we believe that that is vital, as I said earlier, to maintaining a modern system and also having the capacity to handle growth. Speaking of capacity, the system's at capacity. We've had to tell major developments that we cannot handle their wastewater or their processed water from some specific industries. That is revenue we're not gaining. That's revenue that could be going into the system, but because we actually can't treat the gallons of waste, we're having to turn them away. This year, you all budgeted $1 million from the general fund to go to the wastewater system, and there will probably still be an annual deficit in the fund balance. It's not not enough, that $1 million. Going forward, our projections are that those transfers will grow to $1.5 to $2 to $2.5 million a year. Since 2008, since some of you council members and the parish president took office, the general fund has provided almost $8 million in cash to the wastewater department. In addition, annually you budget in the general fund paying the DEQ loan for wastewater of $350,000 a year. So as you can see, millions have been given to wastewater from the general fund. It's unsustainable. We've got to find another diverse source of revenue. And the current deficit is $3.9 million. The final bullet is where we feel justified in asking for this renewal from the citizens, and that is in 1999. The millage to pay off the existing bonds that we're still paying off was $6.9 million. Today it is $2.2. The parish, over those years, systematically and annually reduced that millage as revenue increased, and so our mills are lower on the overall tax bill, and we feel that asking for a renewal simply puts us exactly where we were prior to this proposition, but it completely changes the future financial outlook for the wastewater department. Would you all like me to continue and finish with questions in total after I go to flood protection? Okay. The next millage in front of you relates to the flood protection system or levee system throughout St. Charles Parish. And at the committee meeting, we gave you a blown-up map of what is now the future complete system on both the east and the west bank. As most of you all know, we have a completed federal system on a majority of the east bank. There's still a proposed project waiting a chief's report on the east bank that would protect months and that area to upriver of the Upper Guide Spillway Levee. And then on the west bank, we have some existing portions of a federal levee in Ama to the Davis Pond diversion. We've got Willow Ridge currently under construction. That's the purple line. The purple line extends into Ellington and Magnolia. The green line to the south is the existing Sunset levee. However, that levee is currently being analyzed to determine how many upgrades are needed. And then the two yellow lines you see are the two proposed alignments that are currently being reviewed by CPRA. The first goes southwest towards Lafourche Parish and crosses Bayou des Allemands with a floodgate. The other proposal that's under consideration by CPRA doubles back behind Sunset and heads over to Kelowna, and that's called the Ridge Alignment. That one is mostly an earthen levee with two additional pump stations. The floodgate would end the commitment from St. Charles, and then Lafourche Basin Levee District and Lafourche Parish would take over from there, constructing it to Highway 308. So what's needed? On the East Bank, roughly $30 million is needed for the construction of two additional pump stations, one being the Almedia Pump Station in Reserve, another being the Prescott Pump Station, which would be located in Muntz, and not in Reserve, I'm sorry, in St. Rose. It drains St. Rose and most of the East Bank. Currently, Cross Bayou is the major pumping station that drains the East Bank, and it needs additional support and pumping capacity. So of that $30 million, Almedia and also Prescott Canal Pumping Station and the parish's anticipated set-aside for the West Shore Levee, which is awaiting a chief's report sometime in April. On the West Bank, as you can see, it's a much larger number. It's a much larger system that still needs to be constructed. That includes the remainder of Ellington, all of Magnolia, improving Sunset, which we budgeted somewhere around $75 million, give or take, and that's still being analyzed and assessed. Either the floodgate or the ridge alignment heading towards Kelowna, and includes 5 new major pumping stations on the West Bank. So that's where you get that $268 million number. Those O&M figures that are listed on the East Bank, those numbers, most of them are hitting the Public Works budget today. Because most of that is our fuel cost. And those will continue to grow as cost-share agreements are finalized between St. Charles Parish and the Pontchartrain Levee District for the Bayou Trepanier and Cross Bayou Pumping Station, where we will be setting aside annually into an escrow account money to replace future pumps and gearboxes, engines, and just maintaining the pump stations in general. In addition, as you construct Almedia and the Prescott Pump Station, the fuel cost per major pump station is between $80,000 and $100,000 a year. The West Bank O&M includes those 5 new pump stations and also the annual set-asides required for the upgrading and maintenance of those pump stations, replacing pumps, gearboxes, as I said earlier. In addition, the miles of earthen levees, money must be set aside for that annually. These numbers you're seeing up here are the cost to the Public Works budget or to St. Charles Parish, depending on if the proposition is passed tonight, and by the people once the system is built. So these are complete system numbers. The West Bank and vicinity operations and maintenance number you see up there for roughly $250,000 is a number provided by the Army Corps of Engineers, and that is just the set aside for the few structures contained in the 3 miles of levees from the Davis Pond to the Parish line, Davis Pond diversion to the Parish line. That available funding of $21 million locally, that's St. Charles Parish dollars, and the $17 million at the state, those are funds currently in the budget or at the state. However, they're already allocated to projects under construction or projects that will go out to bid before the end of the year. So we have 3 projects that we anticipate going out to bid before the fall. The first is the Willowdale Extension, the second is the Willow Ridge Pump Station, and the third is the earthen portions of Ellington. At that point, there are no other local dollars or state dollars currently allocated for future levy phases. And so in theory, once those projects are constructed without a new revenue source, levy construction in St. Charles will stop. The Restore Act, that's to be determined, because until the judge rules how much the fines are for BP, we're not able to apply the formula to those fines and figure out how much is coming to St. Charles, although we are allocated a certain amount coming to our parish based on a formula. Go Mesa funding is the same thing. 2017 was the start year. It depends on the value of the federal royalties that given year, and then a funding formula is applied, and we get a very small portion. So those monies will go into an account but are not large enough to finance any sizable projects. So what is the millage in front of you? The millage proposal in front of you is for 4 mills that would finance the constructing, maintaining, operating, extending, and/or improving levees, facilities, and structures associated with outer flood protection systems. We tweaked the language based on the discussion at the committee meeting and also a discussion with a group of citizens over the weekend to make sure that the funding gained from this millage was only spent on the outer flood protection systems. There was the fear and concern that perhaps some funding could be used for internal drainage features. We don't feel that that is any longer a possibility without a true audit, review, and convincing by the legal department, but we feel that this language keeps the funding to the outer flood protection systems, but is big enough to include and take into account all costs associated with designing, constructing, maintaining, and operating a flood protection system. The summary is it's a 30-year millage, and that was done just like the wastewater because this is a tax-limited bond structure, which means the bonds will be sold over time, and you still need 20 years for those bonds to have a 20-year term. So if the bonds are sold in years 9 or 10, you still have the 20 years. The reason I have up there that it's 3.6 new mills is because the Finance Department intends this year, with your approval, when we bring the millage rates to you for adoption, to reduce the road lighting millage by 4. So the residents will only see a 3.6 mil increase to their tax bill, not a full 4 mills. So just as was done with wastewater, we asked our bond counsel and finance to determine what bonding capacity could the Public Works Department and future administrations and council use as leverage money and financing for future levy phases. And the total over the next 10 to 12 years is roughly $87 million in bonding that can be used to leverage CPRA, Restore, or Go Mesa funding, whenever that comes available, also capital outlay and DOTD grants. But this money would be available as needed. The listings and the amounts are just for planning purposes and not specific bonds that will be sold in that year. Again, I'll repeat what I stated earlier. Approval tonight of the proposition or by the voters does not sell these bonds. It's just authorizing the financing available for the bonds to be sold at a future date. The bottom right corner is the historic ratio. We've been able to leverage local dollars with state dollars. We get 81 cents on the dollar generally from the state, and so if you do a quick formula, you get to roughly $157 million in total financing for levee construction into the future. However, we feel once our alignment is determined and the project is put into the state's master plan officially, that those numbers increase over time because now we're a state-approved project. At the bottom, you'll see that the cost to the average taxpayer Based on our assessor, the average home is roughly $175,000. If you back out the homestead exemption, you're taxing $100,000 of that home's value, and it's roughly a $36 per year cost to the taxpayers to finance flood protection on both the east and west bank, and this is being done with obviously reducing the road lighting millage. So, just as we asked for the wastewater proposition, why now? The annual cost will continue to increase. These system costs, fuel, operations and maintenance, and future lifts of the system are not going away. As we continue to build, those costs will continue to grow and hit our public works budget if another revenue source is not found. In 2015, 19.5% of the public works budget went to levy-related costs. Those costs will continue to grow until there is just no capital money left to do normal public works capital expenses. And you'll get to the point where just paying for employees is tough. 19.5% this year in your approved budget. The other problem, and the other reason we're proposing this, is there's a new normal to flood protection at the local level. And that normal is DC's not coming with any funding. Washington is not going to build the West Bank system. Washington is not going to help build Alameda or Prescott. That will have to be the levy districts and the parishes working together. And so we must have funding at the local level to leverage existing state funding and go it alone if we must, so that we can continue to protect our residents. The other point we'd like to reiterate is that all funding currently in the budget, it looks like millions, is allocated to projects going out to bid this year. After that, there is no more funding currently available for future levee construction. And we did a comparison chart. In 1999, the sewer bonds were 6.92. In 2015, if both propositions pass tonight and are approved by the voters, the total mills in front of you tonight for consideration are 5.8. So we're still 1 mil lower than this parish levied in 1999. And so therefore we feel, again, this is a very conservative, practical, and sensible request from the administration to the council and ultimately the people. So what's next? If approved tonight by you, we will begin a public information process of town halls, one on each side of the river, council-sponsored town halls, association presentations. We'll be approaching each levy district for resolutions of support. In addition to any group that wants to get in the room, we'll present the information so that they are informed voters on May 2nd. This proposition, if approved tonight, will go to the Bond Commission for ultimate approval and placement on the ballot on March 15th. Early voting is April 18th to the 25th, and Election Day is May 2nd. You all have approved over $20 million from the general fund into the hurricane protection account. Public Works has budgeted, with your approval, $11 million since 2008 into the hurricane protection account or expenses directly out of Public Works. We've got to continue this system building into the future. I'll stop now for questions and save my closing comments for after we answer questions.